people who don't like the name Scottish National Party and don't like the associations of nationalism. I don't have much difficulty saying I'm a Scottish nationalist. And I don't think we ought to sneer at cultural nationalism for many reasons, one of which I'll come on to when I'm talking about Section 30, is that having your own distinctive culture is one of the essential tests for whether or not you are a people with the right of self-determination under the UN Charter. Being a people entails having a distinctive culture, and Scots do have a distinctive culture. It's an inclusive culture. It doesn't exclude people, and we don't claim it's the best culture in the world, and we don't look down on other cultures, but we do have our own culture. And I think sometimes that's something which people are too reticent about saying. And I think that cultural nationalism is not necessarily a bad thing, and that's something we can discuss as we go along. But when we had the 2014 independence campaign, it was the most invigorating time. I'm fairly sure that pretty well everyone listening here today was a part of that campaign in one way or another, and the sense of community spirit and the sense of activism, the sense of wanting to create a different Scotland and a different world, and the idealism that lay behind that campaign was a great experience. It was a formative experience for me. It's quite. I was, I think, 58 at the time, or 55, something like that. But it's quite a late stage of your life to be having formative experiences. But it was. I found it transformational. I found it led people to think very deeply about the kind of society we want to form. And I think it's very important that we say that we don't want to be just like the UK, but independent. There's no point of an independence that doesn't change anything in society. And the other thing that made me think this was where I wanted to start from in talking to you this evening was it became plain to me I tend to make the rather big-headed assumption that people know about me and know my background and know where I came from and how I got into this. Whereas, of course, that's not always true at all. And I was in the diplomatic service. I was in the diplomatic service for over 20 years. And while I was in ambassador in Uzbekistan, I came across in a very direct way, absolutely face to face, with the really hideous nature of our collusion, the UK's collusion, with torture in the war on terror. And I was dealing regularly with the victims of torture, of terrible torture, torture like having limbs plunged in boiling liquid, people actually boiled to death in some cases, sexual torture, mutilation of genitals, rape, people's children tortured before their eyes, those kind of things. And the CIA were complicit in it. And MI6 were complicit in that they were getting the intelligence from the CIA as a result of these torture sessions. I found the whole thing absolutely horrifying. And I tried to stop it internally. I reported it back to London. I made absolutely sure, as an ambassador can, that I was communicating directly with Jack Straw, the Foreign Secretary, and that he knew about it. And I was told directly by Whitehall, by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, that the gloves were off. It was a war on terror, and in the war on terror, we would use intelligence from torture. Now I was seeing the people being tortured, and I knew in the vast majority of cases of people being tortured were entirely innocent of any of it, and were being tortured purely in order to create false confessions and to create an exaggerated picture of the strength of Al-Qaeda in Central Asia in order to justify American military bases in Central Asia and American alliances with the regimes of Central Asia, which were actually all about oil and gas. And this, of course, was simultaneous with the war on Iraq, which again was nothing to do with WMD and was actually all about oil and gas. And I was simply sickened. And the Blair and Straw years shook me to my core. And I discovered the organization I'd been working in was rotten, that so many people I worked alongside were prepared to go along with what they knew was evil. You know, torture and extraordinary rendition was happening all over the world, and so many senior British civil servants and diplomats were well aware of it. And people, in order to keep their job and their career, basically, heads down, colluded with it and pretended it wasn't happening. Now, I ended up blowing the whistle on it and had a very difficult time where I was faced with all kinds of false accusations as a result of my whistleblowing. And I left the British state in high dudgeon. But I became convinced that the British state was not a force for good in the world, that the British state was a force for evil in the world, and was wedded to some ideas of imperial mission and wedded to a defense policy that wasn't defense at all. It was actually about invading other countries abroad and killing and maiming people for what, under neo-imperialism, is no longer formal annexation of countries, but to extend influence and power over the governments of countries abroad, and particularly in the Muslim world. And I decided that the UK state was just something which needed to be challenged and needed to be tackled. And I found that, particularly as a result of the Blair and Straw years and the war in Iraq, extraordinary rendition, and then leading through into other things like the Chagos Islands and Britain's defiance of the International Court of Justice and on several occasions. There was a great understanding in Scotland that the British state was a rogue state, and I was not alone in that being part of my motivation for wanting to leave the United Kingdom. I'm not saying by any means that everybody's motivation is to do with not invading other countries, is to do with support for the United Nations, with a human rights-based foreign policy, to do with obeying the rule of international law. But I do believe it's very common among independence supporters to wish to see to wish to be part of a far less militaristic state than the United Kingdom, and certainly not to go invading places. The idea that an independent Scotland would invade anywhere, I hope, is anathema to us. And I put that forward as one of the reasons why independence is important. And going along with that is the other strain, the domestic strain, if you like, which is the need to build a far more just society. And inequality in the UK has become simply appalling. The Financial Times was reporting that there are now 130 billionaires in the United Kingdom. And the Financial Times was reporting that as though that were a cause for celebration. But the fact you have 130 billionaires when you have substantial numbers of children who aren't getting properly fed is not a cause for celebration. It's an enormous disgrace. And I think that the need to build a society which is very substantially more egalitarian is also something which I believe is common to supporters of independence. And that, of course, involves much more fundamental change than, say, the difference between Labour and Tory. We're not talking about just putting a penny on income tax. There needs to be a real change in the ownership and distribution of wealth. And that must include, in my view, for example, rolling back some of Thatcher's measures in reducing the ability of Labour to defend itself through unionisation. It involves giving greater rights to workers in the gig economy, which is an increasingly large number of workers are theoretically self-employed, but de facto dependent on the single mega wealthy employer. I'm quite fond of very old-fashioned ideas about worker ownership of shares in companies, for example, and the workers' cooperative model, and compulsory granting of shares. I think big companies like Ineos should be in large part owned by their workforces. The one subject which I always find is guaranteed to rouse Scottish audiences, and I found this is true of the most rural audience or the most urban audience you can think of in Scotland, is of course land reform. And I've seen figures recently that suggest that of all developed nations, Scotland has the highest percentage of its land owned by a tiny number of wealthy landowners. And here again, I want an independent Scotland to be much more radical. I was reading an article a couple of days ago in The Guardian, I think, which said that some of the buyouts in the borders from the Duke of Buccleuch were in trouble because the community buyout organisations were having difficulty raising their share in order to buy the land back off the Duke of Buccleuch at market value, and that I think in one instance the governmental organised Scottish Land Bank organisation had put up £1.5 million or something, and the community had to find the other 5 million themselves. And what stuns me is that we are paying, and I think 3 buyouts between them had given, of the Scottish taxpayers' contribution, had given about £5 million to the Duke of Buccleuch. Now, personally, I don't want any of my taxes given to the Duke of Buccleuch. The whole point of land reform is that these lands were seized by the Highland clearances and the Lowland clearances, and that land distribution is fundamentally unjust. Personally, I think we have to be much more radical. I'm not interested in a Scotland where the tax at the market rates that have been being paid. If all the land were to be taken from the Duke of Buccleuch eventually, that would involve a taxpayer transfer of several £billion to them. I'm not interested in that. I'm really not interested in that. In the pursuit of social justice, we can't buy into the neoliberal model as our starting point. We have to be far, far more radical. The idea that the Duke of Buccleuch deserves market value for his land in the land which is distorted by these, in a market which is distorted by these tremendous historic injustices and by irresponsible historical land use, I think is simply wrong. So on all of this, what worries me is there is a huge gap between the openness to new ideas, the idealism and the popular excitement that lay behind the 2014 referendum campaign, and the mundane business of government that's trundling along in ways that really aren't very radical at all. And if you look at the SNP's defense policy, published on Tuesday, for example, their new paper on future defense. There's a good critique of it on Scott Goes Pop today. It could have been written by the Labour and Tory parties, in that it takes Russophobia and Sinophobia for granted as the starting point. You know, it takes it, an independent Scotland will have Russia and China as its enemies because the UK considers Russia and China to be its enemies. I don't consider Russia and China to be enemies of an independent Scotland. I don't consider an independent Scotland to have any enemies, particularly. And I think the notion that Russia or China wants to invade an independent Scotland, or seeking their wondering, you know, how do we hack into Nimewell's medical research, is a complete nonsense. I would like very much to see Scotland get away from that kind of confrontational nation state attitude. And my worry is that the exigencies of devolution, the difficulties, the genuine difficulties of running a devolved administration and the responsibilities that entail, have led so much of the leadership of the SNP and to some extent the leadership of the wider Yes movement to think inside an establishment UK box instead of thinking outside it. And that concerns me greatly. And now let me come on to what I was meant to be talking about, but nowhere is that more obvious than in the question of how we achieve independence and whether or not we need Westminster permission to do so. We will see how Martin Keating's S30 case at the Quarter Session, we'll see how he gets on. I should say, I think he has, on a personal level, and those, of course, helping and supporting him, but he, on a personal level, has shown magnificent courage and perseverance, and we all owe him a very great debt. And of course, we also owe a very great debt to all those who put their hands in their pockets to support him. Whether he'll win his case or not, I don't know, because I don't know whether, as a matter of UK law, an S30 is necessary before you can hold a referendum on subject out with the powers of the Scottish government under the Scotland Act. I don't know what the Quarter Session will say is the legal answer. I also am concerned that using the doctrine of the supremacy of Parliament, if Martin were to win his case, and I think there's a very good chance of win. When I'm saying I don't know what the answer is, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I'm not a UK constitutional lawyer, and I'm not certain of the answer. What I am pretty certain of is that if Martin wins the case, using the doctrine of supremacy of Parliament, which has already been upheld by the UK Supreme Court in matters pertaining to Scotland and leaving the EU, Westminster will simply pass a law to say Scotland cannot have a referendum on independence without an S30. And that then will become the law and will negate whatever the Quarter Session decided is the case under current law. And I think that's a very likely outcome. That wouldn't be a bad thing, because at least it would be the iron fist of Westminster being openly politically displayed and not hiding behind judges. I don't think we will, but I think the chances of Martin's court case resulting in a decision that says we are allowed to do it, and then Hollywood going ahead and doing it without Westminster intervening to try and stop it by new legislation, I think that's very unlikely. The only thing even more unlikely is the idea that Westminster will agree to a Section 30. I find this entirely baffling, and I cannot get my head around it at all. I'm 100% certain that keeping the UK together is the number one priority of the entire political machine down in Westminster and Whitehall, and is the number one priority of UK civil security services. They can't afford to lose Scotland's resources, and particularly as the world moves on to dependence on renewable energy sources, Scotland actually becomes more important, not less important. But they can't afford to lose our industries. They can't afford to lose our human capital. They can't afford to lose our massive land and sea resources. They're not going to let Scotland go without a fight. The idea that the Tories are more likely to agree to a Section 30, the more certain it is that we will win the referendum, is absolute nonsense. It makes no logical sense whatsoever. People who say, oh, well, if we get up to 60%, 65% in the opinion polls, have to agree a Section 30. No, if we're 65% in the opinion polls, they will know they will lose the referendum and they will never agree a Section 30. They only agreed, David Cameron only agreed to the 2014 referendum because he felt certain that we could not win. At the time he agreed, yes was around 30%. If yes were ever down at 30% again, which I very much doubt would ever happen, but if yes were ever down at 30% again, then there's a chance they may agree a Section 30. The idea that they would ever agree a Section 30 with yes over 50% is just a nonsense. It's just never ever going to happen. There is no political downside for Boris Johnson in being immoral, in just refusing to allow and sticking to this once in a generation nonsense. He could lose every Conservative seat, Westminster seat in Scotland, and it would have no practical impact on his majority at Westminster at all. He doesn't need Scotland politically. Johnson can govern perfectly well without it at Westminster. He is not going to agree a Section 30. Now, this is the conundrum. Scotland is a nation. Scotland, the Scottish people are a people, and a people have the right to self-determination under Article 1, Paragraph 2, or Clause 2 of the Charter of the United Nations. If we are a people with a right of self-determination, then it follows, as a matter of logical necessity, we don't need permission from anybody else. And as I'm sure many of you have seen me write and say frequently before, that is precisely what the UK argued in precise terms before the International Court of Justice in the case of Kosovo, where the UK stated that almost by definition, it will be illegal in terms of the legislation of the state being seceded from to secede. It's almost always going to be illegal to split up in terms of the domestic law of the state you're splitting up. But that is irrelevant to the situation in international law. Otherwise, nobody would ever be able to secede, and people do secede. And just as it was illegal in terms of Soviet law for Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia to secede, but they did. Just as it was illegal for Slovenia in Yugoslav law to secede from Yugoslavia, these things all happened, and they all resulted in international recognition. And being a state with the right of self-determination, if you think we have to ask permission from somebody else, you don't believe we are a state with the right of self-determination. You can't actually believe Scotland is a nation and believe it needs England's permission. You can't hold in logic both those views at the same time. If you believe that, you're conceding we're not a state and we don't have the right of self-determination. So we shouldn't be requesting a Section 30 undermines our own case that we are a people with the right of self-determination. and it's not going to be granted anyway. Why humiliate yourself by asking repeatedly? And remember, we asked Theresa May and we've asked Boris Johnson. We've asked twice and been refused twice. We ask again after May. That will be the third time of asking, and will be refused a third time. Putting yourself through this continual humiliation is merely weakening your case to be a nation. What do we have to do? We have to exercise our right of national self-determination. And it seems to me that we do that the way that it's always been done, in effect. The way that it was done by the Baltic states was that their local Soviet parliaments, councils, Soviet means literally in Russia, their local councils, declared independence and then held a confirmatory referendum. I think that's the way we go. We should be, the SNP should be doing, I think the chances of this are very limited. What the SNP should be doing is declaring that an independence majority at the elections in May will result in a declaration of independence. People should know that before they vote. That gives a democratic test. That gives people a democratic opportunity to vote against. And then there'll be a double lock to make sure it's democratic, because the parliament on the election of a pro-independence majority will declare independence, but that will be subject to a confirmatory referendum. That gives you a double lock, and it enables you to hold the referendum from a position of already having declared independence, which is extremely important because it means you don't hold yourself in troll to the UK government's ability to influence what the question is and try and fix it that way, or have a 3 or 4 question referendum, or have 2 referendums, or any of the other tricks that the Tories will try and come up with. We say, no, we're doing this ourselves as the Scots, and we're doing it on the basis of our parliament declaring that this is the way forward. Now then, you don't get to independence without being radical. We will be almost the last nation to get independent of England. It looks like the Welsh are going to end up being the last. But we will be, well, of course, there are other colonies like the Chagos Islands who don't wish to be part of the UK. And there are other colonies who still do, where populations, as far as one can judge, still do actually wish to be. So there are a very few other people still to decolonize. We will be one of the last nations to get clear of the rule of the English. And I have no difficulty saying that. You know, Westminster is overwhelmingly English. 80% of the MPs sitting there represent English constituencies. It's a predominantly, I don't mean English ethnically, but I mean England as a political concept dominates Westminster and will continue to dominate Westminster after we've left. We are treading a well-trodden path. There are scores of nations which have become independent in my own lifetime, which have left the British Empire or Commonwealth in order to become independent. And in almost all cases, the people who eventually achieved independence were people who were regarded along the way by the British government as anti-establishment, as rebels, as not respectable. If you look at Ireland, which is the obvious comparator, the Irish national movement of Parnell had gone on to be dominated by Redmond for decades. But it wasn't Redmond who actually led, finally, Ireland to independence, because he lost out to more nationalist elements, because he was seen as having become not an enemy by the Irish people. He was still held in fairly high regard, but having been part of a collaborative imperial colonial administration in effect. And if you look at all of the leaders of African colonies who came to independence, people like Kenyatta, like Nkrumah, they were all Museveni, they were all jailed by the British at various times. And all those places had, under the British rule, had local administrations and local administrators, very often local prime ministers, governing on behalf of the British, who were tremendously influential and headed tremendously influential political classes. And in no case was it the local prime minister governing on behalf of the British who in the end led the way to independence. Didn't happen once, I don't think, or at least very, very infrequently. Normally, it took the more radical elements, and I'm not talking of violence, but I'm not talking of violence. Normally, it took the more radical elements to actually achieve independence, because achieving independence from Whitehall and Westminster is not a tea drinking matter. It's not going to happen that Boris is going to say, oh, Nicola, you won in May, you're right, you have a democratic mandate. What was I thinking of? You have a Section 30, let's all do this nicely. Not going to happen. We're going to see every dirty trick in the book. We already have a massively biased media. That's going to get worse and worse and worse. The BBC is going to get even more openly unionist, and we're going to see the Tories becoming more and more unapologetically undemocratic, and more unapologetically looking to strip powers from Hollywood. And this is already happening. This is not theory. This is happening now as we speak. And it's also happening now that Starmer is far less ambivalent on a choice for the Scottish people than Jeremy Corbyn was. But the hardening of the British state position before us is discernible and can be seen before our eyes. So ultimately, it is going to take the need for people to be prepared to act outside UK law, but in accordance with international law. When independence comes, it probably won't come in accordance with the domestic legislation of the UK. It will probably come in defiance of the domestic legislation of the UK and require an act of national defiance to do it. And we are getting to the stage where we have a sufficient majority of the Scottish people, and where the Scottish people are sufficiently fed up with London rule for that act of defiance to become a genuine reality. And I would say, and does that mean there will be a bumpy transition? Yes, there will be a bumpy transition. Everything won't go as enormously smoothly as everyone might wish, but it's perfectly possible to do. And you have members of the European Union, active and successful member states of the European Union. And as I say, I've mentioned Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Slovenia, Croatia, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, which have become independent in the pretty recent past, all of which had very, very bumpy starts, but all of which got the institutions of statehood into place and progressed very quickly to peaceful and stable countries with very good economic growth rates, particularly given that they all started in a much worse position than Scotland is starting. So I think we have to go in this with our eyes open. Anybody who states that this can only be done with Westminster Agreement and can only be done, doing things that Boris Johnson agrees to every step of the way, does not really actually believe in Scottish independence and is not serious about attaining it. And I think that's probably enough of me talking at the start, and I'd be very happy to hear you, and with deference of course to the chair. I should say my own instinct is always that you shouldn't be confined to questions. If you want to say something that isn't a question, then please feel free to do that too, with the chair's agreement. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig. That's absolutely fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody else did as well. One of the problems with being able to speak out is the fact that we actually have 180 people in this meeting. So if I suggested everybody unmuted themselves and just said what they think, I think we'd have turmoil. So I've got a few questions here to put to you first. I'll call the people who've asked them if they want to ask them first. After we've got through those questions, if people can, I suggest you, if you can, do you all know how to raise your hand, the blue hand? I thought it was in participants, but I don't have it now, but that's maybe because I'm chairing the meeting. If you go to participants down at the bottom and you click on that, and then it comes up on the right hand side of your screen, there should be a little blue hand there. Can everybody see that? Well, some people can because they're putting up their blue hands. Some people are saying yes, some people are saying, oh no, nobody's saying no. So maybe you all do have it, in which case, if you want to speak, put up a blue hand and I can call you. But first of all, I think we'll go through the questions that have already been submitted before the meeting for Craig. First one, Thomas Ferris, are you there if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Craig. Thanks very much for your talk. It's been very, very interesting. My question is, on the day the Scottish Investment Bank opened, it announced its first investment, and that was in a company called M Square Limited, who happened to be the make lasers. And I found this a bit worrisome on the back of, not so long ago, Boris Johnson proclaiming that all the soldiers were going to have lasers. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on
it? Thank you. Yes, I had a look to see what I could see, and they do include defence and security among the things that they say they do. And they also say they have medical and other applications, and obviously major applications in computing. But how much of their work is related to, you know, I dislike the word defence because, as I was saying, the UK engages in invading other countries and calling it defence. But how much of it is related to arms, I think, is a very, very important question. And you have to be careful. I was over in Delhi last year talking to some of the people who'd been involved in the occupation of Raytheon there, and Raytheon had been given huge amounts of money by the government of Northern Ireland, and that had all been on the basis of promises about how the money they gave would not be used for missiles, would not be used for bombs and defense. It would be used for other subjects, all of which turned out to be rubbish. It was all based on an entirely false prospectus. And the idea, when you have a company that's involved in the arms industry, that you can somehow put up Chinese walls and you can invest in the medical bit, or some, I don't like that. Obviously, and also I see that there's a company registered in San Jose which has exactly the same name, and which company owns which, and just who these people are, I'm not 100% certain of. But I only just started to look at it today when the announcement was made, so I'm not speaking from a position of authority here. But I had exactly the same questions that you're having.
Thanks for that. I also did a wee bit of research myself, and there's actually the company we started under, I can't remember the name, and then lay dormant for a while before it became M Squared. And now, in about 2015, there's now a company in the same name that this company registered in, now running out of London as well. So that straight away registered the alarm with me as well. So I'll be looking at a bit more into it myself. But thank you.
Right, thank you, Thomas. The next one is from Aggie Chetty. If you're around, Aggie, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much, Craig. Very interesting talk. And my issues were around MI5 and Secret Service involvement in the indie movement, which as a lifelong communist, I'm absolutely certain is going on and has gone on and went on during 2014. So I wondered, given your own experience of dealing with some of these, or having the experience of some of these organizations, if you've got any advice for us about how we can protect ourselves in the independence movement against these interventions by the likes of MI5.
It's very difficult. And of course we've all seen the undercover cops court cases have been going on in London just in this last few weeks, which is very useful to point people to, because of course people who are naturally pro-establishment tend to make out that we're all mad and all imagining these things, and it doesn't happen at all. And yet you have London cases, happening now in the High Court about disguised infiltrators of the environmental movement who were infiltrating groups who were just trying to save forests and that kind of thing, and making activists pregnant and even marrying them as part of their long-term sleeper disguise. So they not only do these things happen, they go to remarkably extreme lengths. One thing I would explain with MI5 and MI6, it's important to remember the difference between officers and agents. Officers are the full-time employees of MI5, and you probably have one who are recruited into MI5 and then undertake different roles in MI5, and may at some stage be assigned to infiltrate an organization in disguise, possibly under an assumed identity or whatever. Agents are not employees of MI5. Agents are people whom MI5 officers pay for information or pay to undertake certain tasks. And there are usually a great deal more agents than there are officers. One officer will run several agents. I think undoubtedly there are a good many MI5 agents in the senior ranks of the Yes movement and the SNP. And agents are very frequent. Remember, an agent is basically an informant or an actor, but not a full-time employee, not a member of staff of the organization. Yeah. It is absolutely normal in governments abroad for senior ministers to be agents, to be people MI6 are getting information from, or MI6 are getting to do things. I have to be careful here, because I'm very much in favor of maximum openness, but on the other hand, this is an area where being too indiscreet can get people killed. So I have to be, but I have been working in countries where senior ministers of that country were acting as agents for MI6. So the idea that it can't happen at ministerial level or at the top level is a nonsense. It happens all the time, and people become agents for various reasons. It can be out of belief, ideology. You know, it could be someone's a passionate British nationalist, but someone like that is unlikely, as an agent as opposed to an officer, to have got themselves into a senior position of influence in the Yes movement in the first place. It is in any case the case that much more often agents giving human intelligence to security service officers do it for money. That is normally what it comes from. Iraqi WMD, the intelligence on Iraqi WMD, it existed. A lot of it was lifted out of some PhD student's thesis and was nonsense. But of the secret intelligence, nearly all of it was procured for cash. And if you get an Iraqi senior military man and you say, I will give you $2 million in cash if you tell me about WMD, he will tell you about WMD. He'll make it up, but he'll do it to get his $2 million in cash. And cash is the normal way. When I was first secretary in the British Embassy in Warsaw, every now and then I would have to go to the bank and get out $200,000 in cash and hand it over in the embassy to the head of the MI6 station to pay senior Poles, including Polish ministers, for information. And I think the chances of senior people in the SNP and the Yes movement being corrupted in that way are actually pretty high, unfortunately. There are other ways. Blackmail happens much less often than you may think. I mean, it's much better. Frankly, people just doing things for large wadges of cash doesn't make very good books or spy thrillers. You know, in John le Carré, it's not generally, people aren't generally doing it for getting large wads of cash, just because it's not so entertaining. But sadly, it's normally not sex. It's normally not blackmail. It's normally cash. But I think almost anybody who doesn't think we are a target for the intelligence services is ludicrously naive. You know, we, the independence movement, are the biggest single threat to the UK state. Yeah. And if we're not trying hard enough. But we are the biggest single threat to the UK state. So we are undoubtedly very, very, very high on the targets of the intelligence services. And we all, you know, there are a couple of very senior people who I personally believe are being, you know, there are things about their actions that I find inexplicable unless they are being influenced by the security services. But by and large, it's not enormously helpful to speculate in public on who may be and who may not be. I'm sorry, that was too long as an answer because we won't get enough questions in, and B, it rambled somewhat, but it's a subject which is close to my heart, and thank you for raising it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, just a little bit shorter might help because I've got.
I apologise.
But having said that, that one leads on very nicely to Andrew Fraser's question. Andrew, could you unmute yourself, please?
Good evening, Craig and everybody. I'm just as convinced as you are that the British security services are busy in our midst. However, my question is, do you think the Scottish Government should be preparing for independence by setting up its own security service? Because I haven't the slightest doubt either that post-independence there'll be some unreconciled unionists who will be engaged in subversive activity and should be kept an eye on.
I think that is very necessary. And the Scottish Government plans, you know, powers to spend money on planning for such things are limited. But it is important that they start doing that, and the work on it should really be starting probably initially within Police Scotland. It's quite difficult to find a way to fund your own security service within the current rules of the Scottish Parliament. But yes, that is very important. I would say that I was talking earlier about all the other states that have become independent from the UK in our lifetimes, and post-colonial studies is obviously an academic discipline in itself. And one thing which is very strongly attested is there is almost always a strong group of people who are devoted to British rule and are opposed to independence. And almost always, that isn't just the kind of governing class who benefit from being colonial administrators. Generally, in pretty well any colony you tend to look at, the British had a favoured tribe or favoured religious group or some group they relied on, from whom they would draw most of their security services, police administrators, etc. But generally speaking, and in some ways that's analogous with the situation in Scotland. Generally speaking, it is astonishing how quickly that feeling ebbs away, and among the ordinary population. I think we will be quite surprised how quickly the bitter unionism, Orange Lodge type resistance dies down and vanishes historically. I think once its roots are cut off, it will wither away. And obviously there is a capacity for violence, and that there are things we definitely need to watch. We definitely need to be preparing to watch. And I agree with you 100%. But I am actually quite optimistic that unionism will simply vanish off the agenda really remarkably quickly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Pat Lee from AFI. Pat Lee,
Thank you very much. Good evening, Craig. Nice to see you. I hope you're doing well with your court case. Craig, obviously I'm from Action for Independence, Max the Yes. What is the best way to get back onto the roadmap to independence? With Douglas Ross openly suggesting that he will collaborate with any of the unionist parties to keep out the SNP at the Scottish parliamentary elections in 2021. What is the best way for the Yes movement? What path should they take to counter this move?
I think it's quite fun to see the unionists panicking in this way and trying to. A Tory Labour alliance would be a dream come true. So, sadly, I don't think it is going to happen, because if it did, then at least there's not that much of a Labour vote left, but at least half of it would come over to us. I think if the Labour actually entered any kind of formal alliance with the Tories. May is a long way away. Still 6 months to go. There is no denying the fact, as a simple matter, of arithmetic, that if the SNP continues to be at the kind of places in the polls it is now, come May, in 90% of Scotland, there's going to be no practical effect from an SNP second vote. There's just not not going to elect anyone. And already at the last election, in the vast majority of regions of Scotland, SNP second votes elected nobody at all, even though there were far more SNP second votes than anyone else's second votes. Just the way the system works. It's very difficult, and I've been asked. That sounds a bit big-headed. That's not quite what I mean. But I've been asked several times, but what is my approach to the list parties, and will I be joining one of the list parties? My own view is that RIC or RISE and whatever showed us that it is very, very difficult to make the breakthrough for a list party without a really big name leading you, and that has to be a name, that's much bigger than my name, that's much bigger than Tommy Sheridan's name or Colin Fox's name or any of the people who've been associated, or indeed, and that's something which I think it's Dave Thompson who's behind AFI or involved, and I think that's something that he would acknowledge too. I think we're all waiting to see how the potential list parties coalesce, because for me, what's obviously not going to work is if we have Alliance for Independence and ISP and the Scottish Socialist Party and Scotia Future whatever all standing against each other. That's not going to work either. And of course, the huge unspoken factor is Alex Salmond. Is Alex going to throw his hat into the ring with a list party? And if he were to do that, my advice would be to everyone else is to get in behind him, and then because even if it seems to me there's every chance if Alex Salmond came in with a list heading up a list party, that would become the official opposition in Holyrood, and the Tories could lose more than half their MPs, which would be absolutely brilliant. But the situation at the moment is difficult. I understand entirely the maths and the idea behind the list parties, but they've got to get together and they've got to find a leader the media are going to take seriously. I guess would be my thinking.
Totally agree with you, Craig. Sorry, can I just do a quick one? Should all the pro-independence parties commit to holding Scottish Parliamentary Election 21 as the independence election and use that result as the plebiscite for that referendum?
Yeah, I mean, I would use the result to declare independence, but then I would have a plebiscite after, as a formal plebiscite, would be my approach. Yeah.
Thanks, Ruth.
Hello.
Sorry, I was on mute. Donald, can you ask your question, please? Donald from Islay.
Hello, Donald from Islay here. Good evening so far on that. My video is not working, so I'm not even sure if you're going to hear us or not. Go on, Ruth. It's hard to interact because I can only speak. I don't think you can see me or that. My video's not right. My broadband width isn't picking up my live stream.
That's okay. We can hear you fine, so don't worry about that. Just carry on.
Okay. Thanks for an excellent evening so far. For folk like myself, Craig, I'm very disillusioned with where the SNP is gone. I'm worried about the lack of democracy within the party. Whether you can sort that out or not, that's up to you. But it goes on to Pat's point he made just a minute ago. What's your view on the list? And you've basically kind of answered the question already. So I think it's kind of come back to front anyway. But what's your view on the second party? Again, just briefly, do you think it all depends on Alex Salmond? Thank you.
Yeah, to take the first bit you were talking of first, yeah, I mean, I've been very disappointed by the management of the SNP, by the manipulation of the conference agenda this time, so no one could discuss anything anyone wants to discuss. No votes taken on anything the leadership may disagree with. As you may know, I'm standing for SNP president at the moment, not because I think there's a hope in hell I'll be elected, because I don't think it is, because I think the payroll vote now is such a high percentage of people at conference that that very little can happen. The leadership doesn't want to happen, and one thing the leadership definitely doesn't want to happen is me being elected president. So I don't think there's much chance of that. But one of the reason I first had the idea of standing was that they refused me candidate vetting because I refused to say I would always, in all circumstances, vote as I was told, because my conscience wouldn't allow me to say that. And then when 2 conferences ago, I tried to hold a fringe meeting on independence and the route to independence. I tried to hold a conference fringe meeting exactly like the meeting we just had. And I was told I wasn't allowed to. And I asked why not. And they said, you're an individual delegate, only organizations or companies can hold meetings. So I said, okay, I have a company. My company will book the hall and hold the meeting. And then I was told, and I got a email from Peter Morell himself saying, no, the company wouldn't be allowed to do that. My company could only hold a fringe meeting at the conference to promote its products as a company, but companies were not allowed to promote independence at the conference. And this is completely crazy. Then I was trying to see what I could actually do, and I discovered they could stop me from being a candidate by the vetting process. They could prevent me from holding a fringe meeting at conference on independence, but they couldn't actually stop me from standing for president. There was no vetting. Any member can stand for president who gets the nominations. And there's nothing they could do to stop me standing. So that was my original idea in standing. And frankly, it was a little bit bloody-mindedness. But then it became much more than that, because then subsequently we saw more and more cancellation of party democracy, more and more. And people should remember the spring conference was cancelled before COVID happened. It wasn't COVID that caused the cancellation of the spring conference. Then this autumn conference, no members' resolutions, no branch resolutions accepted, just these motherhood and apple pie composites, no amendments allowed to them, no real debate. So it's become something much more. It's become a chance for people to protest at the way the leadership is taking a party and the lack of urgency on independence for leadership. So, sorry, but then to come then to your second part, yeah, I really do think that the list party thing depends on Alex or another very senior figure coming in to lead it. I think, but I do think. I mean, I was talking earlier, maybe a little bit in code about how the Redmondites lost out to Sinn Féin or whatever because they just became too establishment. In the end, it took more active nationalists to actually bring Ireland to independence. And I do think there is a parallel there with the SNP. I think they've become too comfortable as the Holyrood administration. I think they've lost. If you're convincing yourself you're doing a very good job as a Scottish government, and if you're personally very comfortable and very well paid and you've got ministerial limousines, it's very easy for independence not to be as urgent for you as it maybe is for the rest of us. And I do feel that's the trap the SNP is falling into. And I'm sorry, I know that offends people when I say that, and I don't mean to offend people, but that is how I feel.
Thank you very much for that. That's kind of how I feel as well. Couple of potential names besides Alex, Elaine C. Smith or Dennis Canavan. I'd like to see Dennis Canavan get his push on with this again. He is a powerful voice for yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I was going to leave my question till last, but it would actually fit in quite nicely here, since we've started talking about your standing for president. I was wondering what you will contribute to the grassroots movement if you did become president. At the moment, I'm feeling very conscious that, well, the elected members that we have, we never see them at the grassroots level of independence in the grassroots Oban. I was wondering if you would get more involved and what you would contribute to the grassroots movement.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I would very much hope to, and I would hope to visit, every branch of every SNP branch and every Yes branch that invited me. I would hope to get to. I would be able to devote myself to it full time. I'd also try and make absolutely sure. And remember, you've only got influence. You've got the influence of your personality and your being and your ability to get there, and partly your willingness to be confrontational. But I would also try to make sure that there was much more responsiveness from the SNP HQ to members, because people are finding that emails and letters and phone calls just go unreturned for weeks and weeks on end, and sometimes forever. And I should say, I personally have, in the process of standing for election, I have on 4 or 5 occasions written to ask things about the rules. How do I know how many nominations I have? I'm allowed to put out a virtual flyer. Is it allowed to have links? Those kinds of questions that you need to know. And nobody's ever replied to any of them, whether I phone or email or whatever. I can't get anybody. I can only get an answer machine if I phone, and nobody replies to any of my emails at all. And that is the experience of so many members. And my own view is there's a horrible cliquishness at the head of the SNP, and they have a view about who's important and who isn't important. And if you're not one of the people they consider one of them, almost, they just ignore you. And again, I'm sorry to say it, because I didn't go into this. It's not my intention to be confrontational and unpleasant, but I think these things need to be said.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. Right, next we have Leonard Morrison. Leonard, are you there? Can you unmute yourself?
Am I on okay now?
Yep, that's fine, thank you.
Hello, Craig. 40 or more years ago, I read the book Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher about, as I remember, so devolution right down to local community level. I wonder if you could comment on whether you would see that as good argument in the discussions for independence. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I remember Schumacher and Small is Beautiful as well. I've still got all those books, Small is Beautiful and Silent Spring, and all the books from that period. I think that was very much that local communitarian spirit was very much the feed behind so much of the street campaign for Yes in 2014. And I also think it's now much more possible because the technologies, particularly the energy technologies of the future, are much more diverse and decentralized than the systems that we grew up with, depending on massive fossil fuel plants and that kind of thing. So and Commonweal have done the best work by a long way on the kind of future society Scotland would wish to be. I would very much like to see more devolved communities, more devolution to communities of decision making. I said earlier, I'm very much in favour of old-fashioned ideas like workers owning the enterprises that they work in. And some of the central, I don't like Police Scotland, for example. I think the idea of having a single centralised national police force was a mistake. That's something I'm not fond of. I'm very much a supporter of a decentralised model.
Right, thank you. Mary McCallum Sullivan.
Hi there, hi there. I just wanted to hear you speak to the difficulty and the implications of what might be conceived of as a conflict of interest for the Scottish government, for the SNP qua Scottish government, between being a government and being, we would hope, the leadership of the movement for independence. That's what we're hearing, a kind of disappointment at not having the leadership that we can say moving us towards independence. And you've spoken to that already, but is there a conflict of interest, and how could that be perhaps resolved?
Yeah, no, I think plainly there is a conflict of interest, and I call it the devolution trap, because there's this idea that we have, through the devolution settlement, we have to show the ability to govern ourselves in those areas in which we are allowed to govern ourselves, and the ability to do that competently in order to build confidence in our ability to be an independent nation. And that makes perfect sense. But there are two big troubles with that. And the first one is you're doing it under conditions of Tory austerity, when you can only work with the resources that the Tory government gives you. So you're continually imposing cuts, which mostly, and the way the Scottish government has done it, they've tried to protect centralised services, and most of the cuts have fallen on local government. But they have been awful Tory imposed cuts, and eventually, no matter how good you are, against an economy that's being ruined by the Tories and austerity being imposed by the Tories, you eventually become, over the years, just an agent of Tory cuts. And standards are bound to decline. And then you find yourself defensively arguing standards haven't declined when plainly they have in some areas. And you're left in this unfortunate middleman position. And that is the trap of devolution, that you end up taking the blame for the mistakes of the Tories in London and the mess they've left you with. And I think that's the biggest problem with devolution. There's then also that psychological problem, which is that you convince yourself that you're doing a remarkably good job, and actually doing such a good job, but maybe the system's not that bad anyway. And then you lose your edge in the fight for independence. I mean, I happen to believe, and again, I'm sorry, because I know his opinions upset people. I do think that the personality of Nicola Sturgeon, she likes to attract and hold power. She's not good at delegation. I mean, if for me, it would have been a very sensible solution for Nicola to say, I'm going to get on with being First Minister of Scotland. I'm handing to Joanna Cherry the responsibility for leading the wider Yes movement and leading us to independence. But that would have been would be sensible. I don't think it's in Nicola Sturgeon's nature to share power in that way or share influence in that way. And I think she tends to see. I think she's among those. I've worked with many different leaders of different kinds, different ministers, all kinds of people in my career, and there are people who have different types. I think she's the type who prefers to be surrounded by people who aren't that good, so there's no competition. And I think she's very, very cheery of boosting someone like Joanna Cherry, who obviously is very good. And so there ought to be ways to mitigate this, but I don't think with the personalities involved that's going to work, is my answer.
Thanks, Craig. couldn't agree with you more, actually. I've got.
Mine could be finishing very soon.
Then
I'll make something to drink.
Somebody, whoever's talking, can you mute yourself, please? I am going to come to the people who've got their hands up in a minute. So I haven't forgotten you there. I'm just going to go on to a question that was asked quite late on, but is relevant to what Craig's just been talking about. And if I can just find it. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? I think it was that one. Right, yes. Leah Gunn Barrett.
Oh, yes, hi. Yeah, so my question was really about the Chief Executive Officer of the SNP, Peter Morel, and I asked a question at my recent branch meeting about his role, the fact he's been in the job for over 20 years, his salary, and was attacked by another member during this branch meeting for doing so. But I was wondering if my questions were out of line, or if in fact I as a member of the SNP had a right to ask them, and about his role in the salmon affair as well with the WhatsApp messages. I just think that there's a lot there that, as Joanna Cherry would say, the boil needs to be lanced. And I'm wondering if that's going to happen, or if you share my concern.
I do share your concern. It seems to me that secrecy has become the default position of the SNP. And everything has to be secret unless you can come up with a jolly good reason for saying why it shouldn't be secret, as opposed to openness being the default position. I can think, if you're a charity, if you look at, say, Oxfam or Save the Children or whatever, you can go to their websites and you can see how much their chief executive and senior staff are paid. That seems to be perfectly normal. When I was a British ambassador, you couldn't see my precise salary, but you could see, it was publicly available information, what grade I was, and that gave you a salary band that I was paid, between 80 and 90,000 or whatever it was at the time. I can see no reason at all. Those of us who are members of the SNP, like me, who pay our monthly subscriptions, pay Peter Morel's salary. So why on earth we're not allowed to know what it is seems to me quite remarkable. What's even more remarkable is Kenny McCaskill told me that he asked the treasurer of the SNP what Peter Morel's salary was, and the treasurer told him that the treasurer was not allowed to know what Peter Morel's salary is. So that seems to me simply astonishing. I can see, and it could be done in the same way that, as I say, my salary when I was an ambassador was public to within about £10,000. Someone could say, well, it's between 100 and 120,000 or whatever. But the idea it should be totally secret seems to me utterly indefensible. It also seems to me plainly not a good idea that your chief executive is married to your party leader. That seems to me something which didn't ought to be said. Which no one ought to try to enforce that people should have just realized that and not put themselves in that position in the first place. And again, this is a minor point. It's not a huge point, but I just give it to you as an example of how secrecy is the norm. When I put my name forward as president to stand for president of the SNP members could then go and nominate, and they could nominate for any committee positions. And apparently over 70,000 people nominated for one or more positions. I don't know how many of those 70,000 did do a nominee for president, but I'm not allowed to know how many people nominated me. Now, why am I not allowed to know that? Why is that secret? It's this extraordinary thing where secrecy is default. And it seems very, very weird for a political party that you should operate on the basis of secrecy.
Thanks, Craig. Right, now I'm going to move on to the people who have got their hands up. First, Alison Wilson.
Good evening. Thank you for calling me. Good evening from North Ayrshire, and thank you for the invite. Craig, I would like to go back to your thing about declaring independence. Previous British colonies have, I believe, certainly most of the African ones had their own tax collecting system, which collected pretty much all the taxes. I don't know much about Czechia, Slovakia. I don't know much about the old Soviet Empire, but if we have to declare independence, we would, if we declare independence rather, we would have to persuade Tesco to pay their tax and VAT to Scotland, for instance, and all the other companies operating in Scotland. And I can just see the UK government saying, right, we're not giving back your pocket money that you pay to us in tax. We're not giving you your pocket money back, and they can starve us of money. How do we get around that?
Those things are, I should say, those kind of things are very likely to happen. That's actually likely to be bumpy. But there already is a certain amount of, as you know, income tax is assessed in Scotland for people resident in Scotland. The VAT, I've got a company registered in Scotland which pays its VAT to an office in Wales. In fact, I think rather strange. That will have to be disentangled. The Tesco are going to pay their tax to whoever physically controls what's going on, and the way multinationals operate, including probably even Tesco, who certainly used to have shops in Poland when I lived there. They've been through this. You know, they've been through it in Slovakia and the Czech Republic and that kind of thing. These kind of crises are not unknown. The key to us is going to be getting recognition from the European Union. And the European Union is going to be strongly motivated to recognize us because it knows we want to rejoin the European Union, and it will be very desperate to be seen to show that the consequences of leaving the European Union for Boris Johnson were very negative. So there's very strong political will in the EU. And once the EU goes, most of the world will follow the EU, and our independence as a state will behave on international recognition, and that will be the legal situation. If we're unrecognized by the European Union and the United Nations, then Tesco is not going to pay us tax, or at least not necessarily automatically going to pay us tax. It's going to be a much more difficult and complex problem. But then if we're not recognized by the European Union and the United Nations, we've failed anyway. Once we are recognized by the EU and UN, and we have established control on the ground, I think you'll find that the willingness of the enterprises active in Scotland to pay in Scotland will have the same problem that all states do of taxing profits when profits are falsely declared as belonging in a third country by invoicing and the other ways that countries can do that. We're going to have to sort all that out. And I should say, I'm not in the comfortable camp. I think this is going to be messy and is going to be dislocated, and there'll be a period of several months to a year getting these things together and getting the systems in place, which is going to be unplanned and hectic, the way that it's going to happen. But lots of other countries have been through it, and they've all come out the other side. And I believe that we will. So I'm not saying that your perceived problem doesn't exist. I'm saying you're correct in your perception of the kind of difficulty that's going to arise. But I believe it is a problem which can be overcome. But that you are right. There will be a messy period, and that's the difficulty. That's where I think that people who think this is all achieving independence is going to be an entirely comfortable process without bumps are going to be disappointed.
Thank you. Patricia Brown. Patricia Brown, you still here? No, maybe Patricia's gone. Right, Alan Thompson.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks very much, and thanks for the invite tonight. Craig, you've got quite a unique position and insight to the way the British establishment works. Is it possible that Nicola Sturgeon, who many folks say if you sliced her open she would have independence cut through her like a stick of rock, is it possible she's actually now had a look at the inner workings of Whitehall, Cobra meetings, etc., and she's actually realised that trying to achieve independence, pulling ourselves away from England, is actually beyond her skill set? I share your view that she's actually doing, contrary to what Ruth Davidson says, a fine job doing the day job, as you like, but she doesn't have the skill, the personality profile that would suggest somebody that's going to take us to independence, which is a different beast in my opinion. Is it possible then that she's gotten to a place where she's realised that she's not actually got what it takes, and that's why seemingly a career in Holyrood is much more attractive to her?
I've almost given up trying to solve the puzzle. I think it's for sure that she believes her own propaganda about what a great job she's doing, if you like, and she really does believe that the people of Scotland are best served by her being First Minister. My own feeling is that she saw Alex Salmond lose the referendum and have to resign and lose his political career, and she's thinking that's not going to happen to me, and so she's not wanting to take the risk. That's my feeling of it. That her and I don't know the woman. I mean, I've met her once. My reading from outside, and talking obviously to people who do know her, is that she's very centered on her career, and it's perfectly possible, of course, to be centered on your career out of a belief that your career is good for other people. But I don't think she thinks a bid for independence is a good career move. That's my reading of it, and maybe that's oversimplistic, and that's compatible with what you're saying, in the sense in that that indicates she thinks she might not necessarily win an independence referendum or not be able to then manage the transition to independence successfully, and then her contribution would be one of failure, not of success. Whereas at the moment, I think she loves the international plaudits, and I think these, of course, the famous photo of her with what's his name, Alistair, Tony Blair's old spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, and her recommendation of Henry Kissinger's book, and all these strange things. And I think she sees herself. I think she loves the adulation of the Guardian, and she sees herself as a kind of Hillary Clinton type centrist figure, promoting an identity politics agenda, promoting good things for gender equality and that kind of thing. I think all of that is more important to her than independence, and has become more important to her than independence. But I didn't know her back in the days when she was apparently a pro-independence firebrand. So I'm not the best person in the position to say what's changed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt, Seattle.
That was pretty much our question, so thanks for answering it already. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Derek Rogers.
Hello. A brief question. The head of your talk, at the head of your talk, you say independence within 2 years. Could you tell us how we're going to get there within 2 years? It seems to me more like 20.
Okay, that sounds very pessimistic. Well, as I say, my own view is we win a thumping majority for independence in May. Then we move forward. I expect that they would insist on asking for Section 30. It will be refused anyway. So then, you know, on a wave of popular enthusiasm, if you like, we declare independence from the Parliament, hold a confirmatory plebiscite, and go out to the UN and the EU for recognition. And the EU are very well minded to grant us recognition for the reasons I was saying, that the UK is no longer a member state, and the EU is an organisation which is basically a club of member states and exists to defend the interests of its member states, of which the EU is no longer one, and we prospectively will be. So I'm much more optimistic than you. I think unionism has had its day, and we are well on the way to independence now. I think that has become the settled will of the Scottish people, and there's no demographic, no age demographic under the age of 55 in which there's a unionist majority, and the unionist minority is shrinking with every poll.
Thank you. Stuart McClintock. Good.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Fine. One thing, two cheeky quick ones, right? Do you think the Alex Salmond fiasco that's going through the Scottish Parliament at the moment with the did he didn't he think type thing with investigation is going to be the downfall of Nicola Sturgeon? And my second thing is, when we go for a referendum, we obviously want an independence referendum. Should there be a space on the ballot paper for yes or no for the EU? Because I've got quite a few friends that are pro-independence but not pro-EU, and the two of them are likely to vote no, where they voted yes last time for independence if there's not an EU bit on it.
Yeah. On the Alex Salmond thing, I should say I'm very, very angry about the Scottish government's lack of candour to the Alex Salmond inquiry and its refusal on hiding documents, and the Lord Advocate in particular. And that I have an interest here because as you know, most people probably know, I'm up for contempt of court for my my reporting on the Alex Salmond case, and the documents which the Lord Advocate is refusing to give the Salmond inquiry are exactly the same documents he's refusing to release for my defence in my in my case. And knowing what's in those documents, the Peter Morell WhatsApp messages are only the tip of the iceberg, and there's stuff there that's worse. And it amazes me that they're able to get away with it, and their ability to get away with it, and the ability of so many good people, good independent supporting people, to refuse to believe that what happened. And what happened was that the government was involved in, the SNP government was involved in trying to fit up Alex Salmond. And very plainly that happened. But Nicola may well be able to survive it because so many people are just not prepared to believe what is obviously true. And they are able to a remarkable degree to defy the Parliament in hiding the documents. So that was a long answer. On the second point, no, I definitely don't think it should be part of the same referendum. I think we should have a referendum on independence. I'd be very open to then having a second referendum on whether we should be in the EU. I don't have any difficulty with the idea of doing that, and I don't have any difficulty with the idea of saying in advance that we would do that. But I don't think independence is ought to be dependent on whether we're in the EU or not in the EU. Personally, as long as we're in the customs union and the free trade area, I'm actually pretty agnostic on whether we're in the EU or not. I think leaving a customs union and the free trade area is suicidal, but actually being a member of the EU itself, I'm reasonably agnostic on. And I would support a second referendum on that subject, but let's get independence done first.
Thank you. I'm getting a few comments, people complaining that we're focusing on anti-Nicola, anti-SNP, etc., etc. I'm not going to make a comment on that itself, but I'm just bringing it to people's attention. Bernard Elliott.
Hello there. I'd like to make a few comments, if it's okay, more than ask a question. I'd like to thank Craig for an excellent speech. That's absolutely brilliant what you talked about. I mean, I didn't realise how cruel the British state was. So you must be quite a marked man by the British state for exposing all this cruelty that's inherent in the British state. So I'd like to thank you for your talk. I think it's been absolutely enlightening. But there are some things I just don't agree with you. I'd like to say regarding Alex Salmond, you know, I mean, personally, I think he was a bit of he liked to drink and he liked to mess about a bit with the ladies, and I think that got him into a lot of trouble. So I hope he doesn't stand in the way of the SNP in any way, because I think it would only cause division and it would hinder our progress towards independence. And he pointed out that Scottish people are different from the English in that we're more compassionate and socialist type people, and I think that is very true. This is a big divide between us and English and Irish. I think that we're a different type of people, so independence would be a great thing. Regarding Nicola Sturgeon, well, I really admire Nicola Sturgeon. I really think if anybody is capable of taking us towards independence, it is her. I think the fact that our husband is the executive, I don't think that's important. That is just the way things have happened through the years of the SNP growing and evolving. The two of them work very good together. So I don't see anything really wrong with that. So, I mean, the only thing that I kind of worry about is what you said earlier concerning the Scottish government's attitude. They're taking a kind of British way of looking at the international outlook regarding Russia and China. That is something I'm totally against, and I hope that can be sorted out with the Scottish government, that, you know, we don't want to fall into this kind of British imperialist way of thinking. That would be a disaster for the independence movement. But other than that, I'd like to thank you for your talk, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Right, I'm going to go back to one of the questions now from Joy Cameron. Joy, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Yep. Craig, that's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Ruth, for hosting this and for everybody taking part. I've got COVID brain, so I haven't got all the right words, but basically what I wanted to know from Craig, and it's been something I've been struggling with for ages. Once we get independence, you said, you know, we would have to basically be prepared to break UK law, as long as we weren't breaking international law. Could you give us a list of your top 3 UK laws that we should be really pushing and ramming against, which will still keep us in with everybody else? It sounds flippant, but I think it's the way to go.
Okay, the law which we're going to end up breaking of all is the doctrine of the supremacy of the UK Parliament. You know, and that is viewed as being founded in I think in the Act of Settlement of 1688, and also in various common law constitutional things. And there's been a firm affirmation of that doctrine of the sovereignty of Parliament in relation to the Scotland Act in the last couple of years. So we will have the UK Supreme Court say you cannot declare independence. And we're going to have to say, we don't care. You know, we are opting out of the UK. So what the UK Supreme Court says is of no interest to us. We acknowledge no court higher than a Court of Session in civil matters. and that's going to be the primary law which we're going to have to take. And then we would, of course, be regarded probably as committing various acts of, because appropriating UK government property, which is in Scotland, which as far as the UK government are concerned is going to belong to them, and as far as we're concerned is going to come, would probably be regarded as theft by them. And they may well even talk of sedition. Sedition is the most commonly used law in these circumstances. Has always been sedition. I expect we'll get Tory MPs waffling on about treason. So in terms of breaking the law, it's quite a fundamental law breaking that's going to have gone. And you'll probably find that there will come stages where, on this bumpy road to independence against the wishes of Westminster, at different times we're going to need civil disobedience, we're going to need occupations, we're going to need to block roads. It's going to be a bumpy route. Hopefully entirely non-violent, certainly non-violent on our part, but bumpy. And as I say, I see all this happening in the next year or two. But the other thing is, I find an extraordinary number of people are quite up to it. I don't find this scares people. In fact, I find it rather inspires people. The idea that if we want independence, we're going to have to take it, and it's going to be. We couldn't be luckier in our opponent, in that, having Boris Johnson in London as the face of the British government that we're trying to get away from. That in itself, every time he comes on TV, I think he wins more people to our cause. I think we are going to be there.
Thank you, Craig. I'm glad to hear you saying that you think some of these things are going to stir inspiration, because that's what we're finding when we're talking to people who are now willing to put their brave pants on and say, if that's what it takes, I want to be part of it. And I would love to think it could happen within the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joy. Craig, do you think what do you feel about the rise of quite a few different groups that are sort of positioning themselves to lead the campaign? We've got Believe in Scotland, all under one banner, SIC, etc. Got lots of them. How do you feel? We can bring them all together, and what are your thoughts?
I had a long conversation this afternoon with Robin McAlpine on exactly this point, and how we get SIC in particular working with the new organisation coming out of the conferences which AUOB organised the last couple of weekends, which I think is going to be called Yes Alba or something, or something similar. And I'm very anxious that I would love everyone to agree what is the common umbrella organisation, and then everyone to be there to be a common organisation that everyone answers to. And I'd love to have that in place, before we get to the to the absolute nub of independence campaigning. I'm not sure how achievable that is. I'm a big fan of all under one banner, and I thought the two conferences they organised on organisation, I took part in the one on and the first one on Saturday, a week ago on Saturday. The Sunday one I couldn't do, unfortunately, but I thought the level of contribution from sort of grassroots activists was absolutely, that new organisation that they're starting up is one I very much want to be involved in, and I'll probably seek to join the committee of that one, but then keeping it closely in touch with others, and that being partly my role, in helping keep it working closely with others. So these organisations don't become rivals. I think one of the very few problems with the last referendum campaign was the lack of any democratic structure to Yes Scotland, which made it difficult because you had people from Yes Scotland who nobody knew who the hell they were, phoning local groups and telling them, they weren't allowed to put out Wing's Little Blue Book, for example, which people found a very useful campaigning tool. And then people thinking, who is this person? What gives them the authority to phone and say what book we put out? So I think the idea of a more democratic structure to the campaign is a good idea.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my worry is that that the various organisations, it feels to me as though there are big egos coming out and they're all wanting to try to control, and that's what my big worry is, that they need to come together and work together, because they're going to speak to different people.
I think that's absolutely you're right. And then we've already seen, like, AUOB somehow it managed to keep on track and keep going forward and keep the marches coming, but it kept splitting with personality splits all the time on its way along. Yeah, no, these things are difficult, and it takes a lot of patience, I think, to keep people working together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. You've got until, I think, 12 o'clock tomorrow lunchtime to get your nomination in to be in part of that committee, Craig. So make sure you do it. Right, we've got another 5 minutes left. We've still got 5 hands up. If we can keep to topic, that would be good. Duncan Mackenzie.
Hiya. Hi, Craig. You've just actually answered my question, so I'll turn it into a very quick comment instead. I think most of us agree that the SNP aren't serving the cause of independence properly at the minute. You said that obviously the list of parties for Holyrood need a name. They need an Alex Salmond or someone. Just as you've mentioned there, all of these yes groups need a name to lead them, to unite them together. It's pretty clear from the way that you've spoken tonight that could well be yourself, Craig. I think there's probably a number of folk thinking the same thing. Is that something that would interest you?
I think I work very well with the yes movement, and I think I'm good at getting on with people and getting people to work together, and I enjoy that. I'm not, because of my history as a whistleblower, if you like, I'm much too much of a hate figure for the establishment, and especially the establishment media, for me to become the public leader of a public campaign. I can go, I love going along to rallies and speaking and doing meetings and stuff. I think that's absolutely great. But as soon as I appear in any high-profile public position, the media are going to call me, mad conspiracy theorist, anti-Semite, all these things they throw at anybody who's at all radical. None of which are true, I should say. But it's quite difficult. Once you become a whistleblower, you've taken on the state to such an extent that you become an accepted hate figure in the way my friend Julian Assange is an accepted hate figure. So I'm very, very keen to keep campaigning. I'm very keen to have a good role, and I'm especially very keen to work with all the various elements of the yes movement and bring people together and things. I'm not in the position, I think, to be a high profile. The BBC will never allow me on. under no circumstances will the BBC ever let me on the BBC, because I know too much. I just know too many secrets that I might say on live TV. You know, I'm slightly limited in practice in what I can do. But your thought was very kind.
Sorry, thanks for that, Craig. So you're saying you couldn't lead. Do you have a name in mind who you may follow then?
Oh, that's a very good question. My own personal view is that I remain very much a fan of Alex Salmond, and I perfectly accept the gentleman who spoke earlier and who said he was a great fan of Nicola, thought she was doing a great job. There's a very, very, very significant proportion of Yes supporters and SNP supporters, a large majority of SNP supporters who believe she's doing a brilliant job, and people are entitled to that opinion. And I want people who hold that opinion, people who hold my opinion, to find a way of working together. I was slightly worried when he said that Alex likes a jam and likes female company, because if liking a jam and like female company is a bad thing, that would rule me out of politics forever. But I think my own view is the future of the movement and the future leadership of Scotland should rest with Joanna Cherry. If you want me to be absolutely blunt and tell you what I think, I think Joanna Cherry is probably the future.
Right, we are now 1 minute. We've got 1 minute to go. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands up, and there is a comment that's just come through that might be just worth reading out. Question for Craig: the court writ to non-identify the alpha betes is only Scotland. Why doesn't WikiLeaks publish the messages? I think you'd have to get the messages first, but you know.
Yeah, no, it's been discussed. You have to be very careful. I mean, I have no doubt that some of these women, not all, but some of these women, I believe from thorough investigation and a lot of evidence, I believe that some of these women were involved in knowingly making false accusations, and that's my genuine belief. But the difficulty for women in making genuine accusations is such that this is a very, very difficult area, and you don't want to do things that make it harder for women who genuinely have suffered to come forward. So it's not the law of the land that prevents me from revealing the names. It's the feeling that wouldn't quite be the right thing to do, even where I actually believe they have acted maliciously. I do think that it's very, very wrong that those people then can, after Alex has been found not guilty, I think for people behind the screen of anonymity to continue their campaign against him is terribly wrong, and that's something I feel very badly about. But that's the viewers. And I have actually discussed it with WikiLeaks directly, and our viewers, it would be wrong to do it, and we haven't. Incidentally, just in case everyone is confused, the alphabet numbers used in court to identify the women are not the same as the alphabet numbers used in the parliamentary inquiry. So woman A in court is not woman A in the alphabet. They've used a different list, if you see what I mean. I've had quite a few people try to contact me to understand why the things being discussed don't match. And that's because the identification letters are different from the court case and the parliamentary inquiry.
That's interesting. Thanks for that. Right, we're now 2 minutes over. I'm happy to carry on if Craig is wanting to, so that the rest of these people can make their comments and ask their questions. But if you're desperate for a drink or a pee or whatever, Craig, then feel free to say no. I want to go.
I feel I've actually tried people's patience quite long. What I would like to do, I think, would be if there are 4 or 5 people who would like to either comment or make a question or whatever they want to do without me coming back, and then at the end I'll say something quickly. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah.
We'll just go through you all then, you with your hands up, and you can say your bit, and then Craig can come in at the end, okay? Right, John Gillespie, have we already done you?
No, you haven't.
Okay.
My comment and my question was really that probably the people who are on the Zoom call tonight are the radicals that Craig would usually identify with. What I find when we go on the doorsteps is that we're probably the more radical ones in Scotland, and that most people in Scotland really don't care about politics. So how would he see us on the doorsteps actually being that radical, if you like, to actually say we're going to make this election being a plebiscite for a referendum? So, you know, if you vote this time, that's it. This is you saying you want Scotland to be independent. That was really my question. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Norman Cunningham.
Yeah, everything that Craig said tonight has been absolute music to my ears, and yeah, I kept myself in with the radicals. But following on from that, wouldn't there be a huge danger if we followed the path that he laid out, say, over a couple of years, that all the money that comes to Scotland in terms of benefit payments, state pensions, all the rest of it, that could actually be cut off at source? And I think that needs to be addressed, because there'll be nothing quicker to turn people against the independence movement if their pension stopped and their universal credit stopped and that sort of stuff. It's all administered from England, as far as I know. So it's something to be, I think, upfront and foremost in our thoughts. All those sorts of things need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Edward Coyle.
Hello, thank you very much. It was actually 2 quick questions. One, going back to the tax suggestions and questions earlier. Craig, any thought on annual ground rent? And the second one was, how do we encourage no voters to meetings about yes?
Thank you. Eddie Morgan. You'll need to unmute yourself, Eddie.
There we go. Yeah, I'd just like to ask Craig. Obviously, since 2014, I've found myself falling more foul of the SNP sort of faithful. What I mean by this is the sort of some people might call it the Wished for Independence campaign. Now, the schism, the way I see it, and speaking to people, and then this divide seems to be growing, is that some people are. A lot of people are saying that, you know, we can't be criticising the SNP because we're holding the movement back, and we're 60% in the polls. So my question and the logic behind that is, of course, is that they all say that we can't do anything now to upset the cart. We must wait until after Indy before we do anything radical. Can I just ask Craig what his opinion on this is? I mean, where does he stand on this? Can he try to be objective in that? Because one's got to be better than the other, but we're never the twain are going to seem to meet by the looks of it to me. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Wilma Watts.
Sorry, I wasn't asking a question, just to say thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed it and agree with most of what was said tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilma. Excellent one to finish on. Over to you, Craig.
Right, thanks. And forgive me if I don't answer all the points. I'll just make some sort of closing remarks. I think we and the question we are asking is not unique in that they're interested in politics, many of them, and are not as fully cognizant of the details of policy as the people who knocks on their doors. I think that's, you know, that's a normal situation in any election. But the main thing is the message isn't complex. The message is this is for independence. People have had a referendum on independence, and people's minds are fairly well made up on independence. So it's not a new concept for them. I don't see it as a particularly difficult thing to get over on the doorstep. The SNP, I think, is the only vehicle we have that realistically can operate through the Scottish Parliament and get us to independence. The SNP has to succeed if we're going to get to independence. The way I try to put it to people is to say that the SNP is the necessary vehicle for independence. I'm not saying let's build a new vehicle. I'm saying let's get that vehicle pointing in the right direction, which is why I would urge people. I didn't tear up my membership card of the SNP. I stayed in the SNP, and I'm standing for president of the SNP in the hope of helping change the direction of that vehicle in a more radical pro-independence direction. That's what I would urge people to do. We are going to have difficulties when we become independent, and we are going to have difficulties with London, particularly if it is done in a way which disgruntles London, which London is unhappy about with regard to cash flows between the countries. But remember, more cash flows out of this country than flows back in, and we have to concentrate not so much on getting the money back from London as on stopping it going out of Scotland in the first place, and controlling those enterprises that we have and making sure that they are paying their money to Edinburgh, not down south. And that will be a bumpy period. I expect the first year or two of independence to be bumpy, and I think anyone who expects a smooth transition will be disappointed. But I think also you shouldn't underestimate the wave of energy and patriotism that's going to be released on independence. So there's going to be a tremendous feeling of euphoria that spreads through the country once we are independent. That will carry us through a bumpy period. But I think to pretend there isn't going to be a bumpy period is a mistake. I think that there will be areas of transition which are difficult for a while. I don't think it will last. Even in cases like the Baltic states, no people didn't starve. They were much less well organized and able to take things forward than we are. But the transition wasn't that bad. I think we have very, very sophisticated financiers in this country. I think we will get through it. I really do think, and I'm genuinely hopeful. I believe we will get to independence. I don't think that the SNP leadership are going to be able to stand against their own mass membership if they don't track on with independence in the next 2 years. I think I too am sensing, of course, there's tremendous split on all these people, but the people who are entirely loyal to the leadership of the SNP and who think I'm mistaken in my doubts of the leadership of the SNP, the large majority of those people say, no, you're wrong, Nicola does intend to crack on with independence, and we will be getting an independence referendum next year, and we will. The percentage of people who actually don't want independence for 10 years or so, who are in the independence movement, is very small. And I think their own membership, I think the SNP members will force the SNP leadership. Either they'll force the current SNP leadership to take action, or there will be, inside the next year, a change of leadership to a leadership that will take action. And I genuinely believe we will. I genuinely believe in 2 years' time, independence will come. I think it has become an unstoppable force. And that's down, and that is down. And all revolutions are led by the radicals. All revolutions are led by the radicals. That's how revolutionary change happens. And I think we have reached that point.
Right, couldn't agree more. Thank you very, very much, Craig. It's been absolutely fantastic. I don't know about everybody else, but I'm inclined to invite you back sometime in the new year and offer another dose of you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Good, good. I'm glad. Thanks to you, and thanks to everybody for coming.